David Williams stepped out of the government building, still feeling the weight of what had just happened. After months of interviews, background checks, and community meetings, he was finally the new police chief of Riverside County. The paperwork was signed, the handshakes were done, and in just 3 days he would walk into that department as the boss. He loosened his tie and walked toward his car, thinking about the challenges ahead. The department had problems, everyone knew it. That's exactly why they brought him in. His 20 years in law enforcement, including his time as a detective in the neighboring county, had prepared him for this moment. He was ready to make real changes. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot as David drove through the tree-lined streets toward home. These would be his streets to protect soon. Every corner, every neighborhood, every family living here would depend on the decisions he made as chief. His phone buzzed with a text from his wife. "Stop for something silly. These officers are being weird. Love you." David frowned slightly but didn't think much of it. His wife, Rebecca, was a smart woman, a civil rights lawyer who knew her way around law enforcement. She could handle herself in any situation. Still, something about the message felt off. He turned onto Maple Street, the same route Rebecca would take home from her law office. That's when he saw the flashing lights up ahead. 2 police cars had someone pulled over. David slowed down, his detective instincts kicking in automatically. It was just routine curiosity at first, the kind any cop develops after years on the job. But as he got closer, his heart started racing. That was Rebecca's silver sedan. David pulled over about 50 feet behind the police cars and stepped out. He could see Rebecca standing beside her car talking to 2 officers. Even from a distance, something looked wrong. The officers seemed tense, almost aggressive. Rebecca had her hands up slightly, the way people do when they're trying to calm a situation down. He started walking closer, trying to understand what was happening. Rebecca had been driving home from work just like any other day. What could possibly have gone wrong? One of the officers was pointing at Rebecca's car, saying something David couldn't hear. The other officer had his hand resting on his belt close to his weapon. That made David's stomach drop. This was supposed to be a simple traffic stop. Why were they treating his wife like a criminal? Rebecca was speaking calmly, probably explaining whatever minor traffic issue had caused the stop. She was good at staying cool under pressure. It's what made her such a successful lawyer. But David could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she held herself when she was trying to stay in control of a bad situation. The first officer, a stocky guy with short brown hair, was getting more animated. He kept interrupting Rebecca every time she tried to speak. His partner, younger and taller, seemed less sure about the whole thing, but he wasn't stepping in to calm things down either. David was close enough now to hear pieces of the conversation. "I'm going to need you to step back." From the vehicle, the first officer was saying, "Officer, I just want to understand what I did wrong," Rebecca replied, her voice steady but strained. "Ma'am," I said, "step back. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Rebecca took a small step back, but David could see her frustration building. She wasn't the type to back down when she knew she was right, especially when someone was being unreasonable. "Can I at least see your badge number?" she asked. "I have a right to know who I'm dealing with." That's when everything went wrong. The first officer's face changed completely. "You questioning my authority? You think you can tell me how to do my job?" "I'm not questioning anything," Rebecca said, her lawyer training keeping her voice controlled. "I'm asking for information I'm legally entitled to have." The officer stepped closer to Rebecca, and David saw his wife instinctively take another step back. "Lady, you better watch your attitude. I don't care what you think you know about the law." David started walking faster. This was escalating way beyond what any traffic stop should look like. His wife was a respected attorney, not some criminal they needed to intimidate. "I'm asking you nicely," Rebecca continued, still trying to keep things professional. "What was the reason for this stop?" The second officer finally spoke up. She was weaving a little bit back there. "Could be impaired driving?" David almost laughed despite the tension. Rebecca barely drank and never during the day. Anyone who spent 5 minutes with her could see she was completely sober. "I haven't been drinking," Rebecca said firmly. "I was checking my GPS when I drifted slightly." "That's not a crime." The first officer was getting redder in the face. "So now you're telling me what is and isn't a crime? Who do you think you are? I'm a lawyer, Rebecca said simply. And I know my rights. That seemed to make everything worse. The officer's hand moved closer to his weapon. Oh, we got ourselves a lawyer. Think you're better than us working folks, huh? David was close enough now to intervene, but he wanted to understand the full situation first. Rebecca caught sight of him over the officer's shoulders and gave him a small nod, her way of letting him know she was okay, but that things were getting tense. The younger officer looked uncomfortable with how his partner was handling things. Maybe we should just write the warning and let her go, he suggested quietly. I'll decide when this stop is over, the first officer snapped back. Then he turned back to Rebecca. You got some ID? Registration? Rebecca reached slowly into her purse, moving carefully to avoid any sudden movements. She handed over her license and registration. The officer barely glanced at them before tossing them back toward her. They scattered on the ground. Pick those up, he ordered. Rebecca stared at him. Excuse me? I said pick them up. You dropped them. You threw them. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut. David could see this was about to explode. His wife was right. The officer was being completely unreasonable. But she was also stubborn enough to stand her ground, even when it might not be the smart thing to do. Rebecca bent down to pick up her scattered documents. As she stood back up, the first officer was right in her face. Let me tell you something, lady. I don't care how many law books you've read. Out here, I'm the law. You understand that? Rebecca looked him straight in the eye. No, officer. You enforce the law. You don't get to make it up as you go. That's when David heard the sound that would change everything, the metallic click of a weapon being drawn. In a split second that felt like an hour, everything went wrong. The officer's gun was out, though David couldn't tell if it was intentional or if something had gone wrong with the holster. Rebecca jumped back, her hands flying up. The younger officer shouted something David couldn't make out. Then came the sound that would haunt David forever, a sharp crack that echoed off the houses around them. Rebecca cried out and stumbled backward, her hand going to her shoulder. Blood was already showing through her white blouse. David ran toward his wife, not thinking about anything except getting to her. The woman he loved was hurt and bleeding, and nothing else in the world mattered. The paramedics had Rebecca on a stretcher and were loading her into the ambulance when another police car arrived. David recognized the officer who stepped out, Sergeant Lisa Chen from Harbor County. They had worked together on several cases over the years, and she knew him well. Lisa took one look at the scene, David standing with his hands up, surrounded by officers with drawn weapons and Rebecca being loaded into an ambulance, and her face went white. David? She called out, confusion clear in her voice. What the hell is going on here? Officer Rodriguez spun around to face her. You know this guy? Know him? Lisa said, walking closer. He's Detective David Williams from Harbor County. We've worked together for years. She looked at David with concern. David, what happened? Is Rebecca okay? The effect on the other officers was immediate. Torres lowered his weapon completely, looking sick to his stomach. Bennett stepped back, uncertain what to do. Only Rodriguez kept his gun up, though his confidence was clearly shaken. That's impossible, Rodriguez said, but his voice had lost most of its authority. This guy was acting suspicious, interfering with our scene. Lisa looked around at the blood on the sidewalk, the scattered papers from Rebecca's traffic stop, and the obvious signs of what had really happened. Her expression shifted from confusion to anger. What scene? She demanded. This looks like a traffic stop gone wrong. Why was Detective Williams' wife shot? Torres found his voice first. It was an accident. Rodriguez's weapon discharged during the stop. Discharged how? Lisa's voice was getting louder. And why are you treating David like a suspect? Rodriguez was starting to realize how bad this looked, but he was too deep in to back down completely. The subject was acting aggressively, questioning our authority. When the discharge occurred, this individual appeared and started interfering with the scene. This individual, Lisa repeated, her voice dripping with disbelief, is a 20-year veteran detective whose wife you just shot. And instead of getting her medical attention, you pointed guns at her husband. More cars were arriving, supervisors, investigators, and unfortunately, a news van. David could see this was about to become a circus, and all he wanted was to get to the hospital to be with Rebecca. Captain Peterson from Riverside County pulled up and epped out of his car. David had met with him several times during the hiring process. Peterson took one look at the scene and immediately understood what had happened. "Jesus Christ," Peterson muttered under his breath. Then louder, "Someone better explain to me why my new police chief is standing in the street with his hands up." The words hit the assembled officers like a bomb. Torres actually stumbled backward. Bennett's mouth fell open. Even Rodriguez finally lowered his weapon, the reality of the situation sinking in. "Your new police chief?" Torres said weakly. Peterson walked over to David. "You can put your hands down, Chief Williams." "Are you injured?" David lowered his hands, relief flooding through him. "No, sir. But my wife needs to get to the hospital." "She's been shot, of course." "Lisa, can you drive Chief Williams to the hospital?" "Absolutely," Lisa said immediately. As David started toward Lisa's car, he could hear Peterson addressing the other officers behind him. The captain's voice was controlled, but David could hear the fury underneath. "Rodriguez, Torres, Bennett, you three are going to explain to me exactly how a routine traffic stop resulted in my new police chief's wife being shot and the chief himself being held at gunpoint, and this better be a damn good explanation." The ride to the hospital was tense. Lisa kept glancing at David in the passenger seat, clearly wanting to ask questions but not sure where to start. "How bad was it?" she finally asked. "Bad," David said simply. Rebecca was asking to see a badge number, asking what she'd done wrong. Rodriguez got aggressive, claimed she was resisting. His weapon went off somehow. Lisa shook her head. "Rodriguez has had complaints before. Excessive force, racial profiling. I'm surprised he's still on the street. Well, he won't be after today." When they reached the hospital, David rushed inside to find Rebecca already in surgery. The doctor explained that the bullet had hit her shoulder, missing any major arteries but causing significant muscle damage. She would recover, but it would take time and physical therapy. David sat in the waiting room, finally allowing himself to process what had happened. In the span of an hour, everything had changed. He was supposed to start his new job on Monday as the leader of a police department. Instead, he had watched officers from that same department shoot his wife and then treat him like a criminal. His phone started ringing almost immediately. Captain Peterson, the mayor, city council members, reporters who had somehow gotten his number. David turned the phone off. He wasn't ready to deal with any of that yet. Lisa stayed with him, fielding calls and keeping reporters away. About an hour later, Captain Peterson arrived at the hospital. "How is she?" Peterson asked, sitting down next to David. "She'll be okay. Surgery went well, but it's going to be a long recovery." Peterson nodded. "I'm glad to hear that. And I want you to know, Rodriguez has been suspended immediately. There's going to be a full investigation, internal affairs, probably criminal charges. What about Torres? He's on administrative leave pending investigation. He didn't fire his weapon, but he pointed it at you after the shooting. That's not acceptable." David leaned back in his chair. "Captain, I have to ask, what kind of department am I walking into? If this is how your officers treat citizens, how are they going to react to having me as their boss?" Peterson was quiet for a long moment. "I won't lie to you, Chief, we have problems. That's why we hired you. But after today, some of those problems just became a lot more obvious." "Rodriguez has had complaints before?" "Yes, multiple complaints over the years. Excessive force, inappropriate conduct, possible bias. The union has protected him, and previous leadership didn't want to rock the boat." David thought about Rebecca, lying in a hospital bed because an officer with a history of problems had been allowed to keep carrying a gun and badge. "That changes Monday," David said firmly. "Are you still planning to take the position?" Peterson asked. "No one would blame you if you decided this wasn't worth it." David looked through the window toward Rebecca's room, where she was sleeping off the anesthesia. She had dedicated her career to fighting for civil rights, to making sure people were treated fairly by the system. How could he walk away from a chance to make real changes? "I'm taking the job," David said. "But things are going to be different." Peterson smiled grimly. "I was hoping you'd say that." Over the next few hours, the story spread everywhere. Social media exploded with outrage. The local news led with "Police shoot new chief's wife." National news picked it up by evening. David's phone had dozens of missed calls from reporters, activists, and politicians. Rebecca woke up around dinner time, groggy but alert. David held her hand as she tried to piece together what had happened. "The officer shot me," she said. Not really a question. "Yeah." "During the traffic stop. It's going to be okay, though." Rebecca squeezed his hand. No, it's not okay. This is exactly why you need to take that job, David. This is exactly the kind of thing that has to change. Are you sure? After what happened today, I could walk away. We could go back to Harbor County. Forget any of this ever happened. Rebecca struggled to sit up slightly, wincing at the pain in her shoulder. David, how many other wives, daughters, mothers don't have husbands who are police chiefs? How many of them don't get justice when something like this happens? You have a chance to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. David knew she was right, but the weight of it felt overwhelming. In 3 days, he would walk into a police department where some officers had just held him at gunpoint. He would have to lead people who might not respect him, might not want him there, might even hate him for what his presence represented. But he would also have the power to make changes that could prevent other families from going through what his family had just experienced. Outside Rebecca's hospital room, David could see reporters gathering in the parking lot. Tomorrow, the story would be everywhere. By Monday, when he walked into the Riverside County Police Department as their new chief, everyone would know exactly what had happened. Some would see him as a victim seeking revenge. Others would see him as an outsider trying to destroy their department. A few might see him as someone who understood exactly what needed to change and had the experience to fix it. Rebecca was right, though. This wasn't about him anymore. It was about making sure no other family had to go through what they had just experienced. David squeezed his wife's hand and made his decision. On Monday morning, he would walk into that police department as their new chief. And things would never be the same. But first, he had to figure out how to lead people who had just held guns on him while his wife bled on the sidewalk. The challenge seemed impossible. But if anyone could do it, David knew it had to be him. The next morning, David woke up in a hospital chair next to Rebecca's bed. His neck was stiff, his back ached, and his phone was buzzing constantly with calls he didn't want to answer. Rebecca was awake, picking at the hospital breakfast with her good arm. "You look terrible," she said with a weak smile. "Thanks. You look beautiful." And she did, even with her arm in a sling and exhaustion in her eyes. A nurse came in to check Rebecca's vitals, followed immediately by Dr. Harris, who had performed the surgery. "Good news," the doctor said. "The surgery went perfectly. No nerve damage, no complications. You'll need physical therapy, but you should have full use of your arm back in a few months." Relief flooded through David. He had been trying not to think about the worst-case scenarios, but hearing the doctor confirm Rebecca would be okay made him realize how scared he had really been. After the doctor left, David's phone rang again. He glanced at the screen. Mayor Thompson. He had been avoiding the mayor's calls since yesterday, but he couldn't put it off forever. "I have to take this," he told Rebecca. "Chief Williams?" The mayor's voice was carefully neutral. "How is your wife doing?" "She's going to be fine, thank you." "I'm very glad to hear that. Listen, I think we need to meet as soon as possible. This situation has created some complications." David didn't like the sound of that. "What kind of complications?" "The kind we should discuss in person. Can you come to my office this afternoon?" After hanging up, David had a sinking feeling about what the mayor wanted to discuss. Rebecca must have seen it on his face. "What's wrong?" she asked. "I think they want me to reconsider taking the job." Rebecca's expression hardened. "Because their officers shot me?" "That's exactly why you need to take the job." David's phone buzzed with a text from Captain Peterson. "Need to talk ASAP. Media is everywhere. City Council meeting this afternoon." 2 hours later, David sat across from Mayor Thompson in his office. Also present were 3 city council members and the city attorney. The tension in the room was thick. "Chief Williams," the mayor began, "let me start by saying how sorry we all are about what happened to your wife. It was completely unacceptable." "Thank you. However, we need to discuss the practical implications of moving forward with your appointment." David had expected this, but it still stung. "You want me to step down before I even start?" Councilmember Janet Riley spoke up. "It's not that simple. The incident has created a media firestorm. There are protesters outside the police station demanding justice. Some are calling for Rodriguez to be arrested immediately." "Maybe he should be arrested," David said quietly. The city attorney, a thin man named Brooks, leaned forward. "That's exactly the problem. How can you objectively lead a department when you're personally involved in an ongoing investigation? There are serious conflict of interest issues here. There are also serious reform issues, David replied. An officer with multiple complaints shot an innocent woman during a routine traffic stop. Then he and his partner held the new police chief at gunpoint. If you think changing leadership is going to make this go away, you're wrong. Mayor Thompson shifted uncomfortably. No one is suggesting we cover this up, but perhaps it would be better for everyone, including you and your wife, if you took some time to recover from this trauma before taking on such a demanding position. David realized what was really happening. They were scared. Scared of the media attention. Scared of the protesters. Scared of having to explain to the public how their police department had shot the new chief's wife. Let me ask you something, David said. If this had happened to any other citizen, if Rodriguez had shot someone else's wife during a traffic stop, would you be asking me to step down? The silence in the room was telling. Of course not, David continued. You'd expect me to investigate it thoroughly and hold the responsible officers accountable. That's exactly what I'm going to do. Councilmember Riley tried again. But the optics are terrible. The community is divided. Some people think you'll be too harsh on the officers involved. Others think you can't be objective. Maybe it would be better to bring in someone from outside. I am from outside, David interrupted. You hired me specifically because I'm from outside. Because I don't have relationships with the problem officers in your department. The city attorney spoke up. But now you do have a relationship? A very personal one, David stood up. You're right. I do have a personal relationship now. I know exactly what it feels like to watch your wife get shot by a police officer who's supposed to protect and serve. I know what it's like to be treated like a criminal while trying to help an injured person. And I know what it's like to have officers point guns at you based on nothing but assumptions and prejudice. He looked around the room at their uncomfortable faces. That personal experience doesn't disqualify me from this job. It qualifies me for it. Mayor Thompson tried one more approach. David, think about your wife. Think about the stress this job will put on your family after what you've been through. Maybe it would be better. Don't, David said firmly. Don't pretend this is about protecting my family. This is about protecting your political careers. David left the mayor's office angrier than he had been since the shooting. They wanted him to walk away quietly, to let them bring in someone who wouldn't ask hard questions about how Rodriguez was still on the street, despite his history of complaints. Back at the hospital, Rebecca was sitting up in bed, watching the news coverage on the room's television. The story was everywhere. Local news, national news, social media. Protesters had gathered outside the police station with signs reading, "Justice for Rebecca and fire Rodriguez now." How did the meeting go? Rebecca asked, though she could probably guess from his expression. They want me to step down. For the good of the department, they say. Rebecca muted the television. What did you tell them? That I'm taking the job on Monday, just like we planned. Rebecca smiled, the first real smile David had seen from her since the shooting. Good. David's phone rang. Captain Peterson. Chief, we have a problem. About 50 officers have signed a petition saying they don't have confidence in your leadership after yesterday's incident. David closed his eyes. What exactly does the petition say? That you're biased against law enforcement? That you'll use your position to seek revenge? That the department can't function with you as chief? And what do you think, Captain? Peterson was quiet for a moment. I think those 50 officers are exactly the ones who need new leadership the most. That evening, David sat in Rebecca's hospital room, thinking about the challenge ahead. Half the department had essentially declared war on him before he even started. The mayor and city council wanted him gone. The media was watching his every move. But there were also hundreds of messages of support from community members, civil rights organizations, and police reform advocates. People who saw this as an opportunity for real change. Rebecca had fallen asleep, and David was reading news coverage on his phone when Torres appeared in the doorway. The young officer looked terrible, pale, exhausted, and deeply shaken. Chief Williams? Torres said quietly. Could I talk to you for a minute? David stepped into the hallway. What do you need, Officer Torres? I wanted to apologize. For what happened yesterday. For pointing my gun at you. For not stopping Rodriguez when I should have. David studied the young man's face. Torres seemed genuinely remorseful, but David had to be careful. This could be an attempt to gather information or manipulate him. Why didn't you stop him? David asked. Torres looked down at his feet. Rodriguez has been my training officer for 6 months.
He kept telling me your wife was being difficult, that she was resisting.
I should have known better, but I trusted his judgment. And when you realized what was really happening, by then it was too late. The gun went off. You were there trying to help her, and Rodriguez was screaming about threats and suspicious persons. Everything happened so fast. David could see the young officer was tormented by what had happened, but good intentions didn't undo the damage. Officer Torres, in 3 days I'm going to be your chief. I want you to understand something. What happened yesterday can never happen again. Not to my family, not to anyone's family. Torres looked up, meeting David's eyes. Yes, sir, I understand. Do you? Because that petition going around the station suggests a lot of officers don't want me as their chief. Are you one of them? Torres shook his head. No, sir. I think the department needs someone like you. Someone who will make sure officers like Rodriguez can't hurt innocent people. After Torres left, David thought about the conversation. Maybe there was hope for some of the officers. Maybe not everyone in the department was like Rodriguez, but Monday morning was still coming, and David would have to walk into a building full of people who either didn't trust him or actively wanted him to fail. Rebecca woke up as David was settling back into the uncomfortable hospital chair. Who was that? She asked Officer Torres, the younger one from yesterday. He came to apologize. Do you believe him? David considered the question. I think he's genuinely sorry about what happened. Whether that means he'll be a good officer going forward, I don't know yet. Rebecca reached over and took his hand with her good arm. You know, this is just the beginning, right? Monday is going to be the hardest day of your career. David squeezed her hand. I know. But we're going to change things, Rebecca. We're going to make sure no other family goes through what we just went through. Outside the hospital window, David could see reporters still camped out in the parking lot. The story wasn't going away. If anything, it was getting bigger. In less than 48 hours, David would walk into the Riverside County Police Department as their new chief. Some officers would be watching to see if he was weak, if they could intimidate him into leaving like the politicians had tried to do. Others would be waiting to see if he was fair, if he could lead a department that included the same officers who had pointed guns at him. David knew one thing for certain. Monday morning would determine not just his future as police chief, but the future of police reform in Riverside County. The question was whether he was strong enough to handle what was coming. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching David's mood as he stood outside the Riverside County Police Department. The building looked different than it had during his interviews, more imposing, more hostile. Media vans lined the street, and protesters had gathered on both sides of the entrance. Some held signs supporting police reform. Others demanded he step down before he even started. Rebecca had been discharged from the hospital the night before, against the doctor's recommendations. She insisted on being there for David's first day, even though her arm was still in a sling and she was clearly in pain. You don't have to come in with me, David said, adjusting his tie for the third time. Yes, I do, Rebecca replied firmly. If I hide at home, it sends the message that they broke me, that they won. I won't give them that satisfaction. They walked through the crowd of reporters and protesters together. Cameras flashed, people shouted questions, but David kept his eyes forward and his hand gently on Rebecca's back, guiding her through the chaos. Inside, the building was eerily quiet. Officers who would normally be bustling around the lobby had found reasons to be elsewhere. The few who were visible watched David and Rebecca with a mixture of curiosity and hostility. Captain Peterson met them at the front desk. Good morning, Chief. Mrs. Williams, how are you feeling? I've been better, Rebecca said with a slight smile. But I'm here. Peterson led them through the building toward the chief's office. As they walked, David could see officers peeking out of doorways, whispering in small groups, generally acting like they were watching an enemy invasion rather than welcoming their new leader. How many officers reported for duty today? David asked. About 80% of normal staffing, Peterson replied. Some called in sick, others requested vacation days. Nothing technically wrong with it, but the timing is suspicious. They reached the chief's office, David's office now. It was bigger than he had expected, with windows overlooking the main squad room. Perfect for watching how his officers reacted to his presence. The department heads are waiting in conference room A for your first staff meeting, Peterson said. Whenever you're ready. David looked at Rebecca, who was settling carefully into a chair by the window. "I'll be fine," she said. "Go be their chief." The conference room was tense. Around the table sat 5 lieutenants, 3 captains, and 2 commanders, the leadership team David would need to work with to run the department. Their faces ranged from openly hostile to carefully neutral. "Good morning," David said, taking his seat at the head of the table. "I know this isn't how any of us expected to start, but here we are." Lieutenant Bradley, a 20-year veteran, spoke first. "Chief, with all due respect, how do you expect to lead this department objectively? You're personally involved in an ongoing investigation." David had expected this question. "Lieutenant, if I was personally involved in every case that affected me as a police officer, I would never be able to do my job. My wife was the victim of what appears to be excessive force during a traffic stop. That doesn't disqualify me from leading this department. It reminds me why good leadership is essential." Captain Martinez leaned forward. "But the officers involved are our officers. How do we know you won't use your position to seek revenge?" "Because seeking revenge isn't justice," David replied. "And because my job is to serve this entire community, not settle personal scores." Commander Foster, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke. "Chief, there's a lot of talk in the ranks about the changes you might make. Some officers are worried about their jobs, their futures." David looked around the table at these senior officers who would either help him reform the department or fight him every step of the way. "Let me be clear about something," David said. "Good officers, officers who serve the community with integrity and professionalism, have nothing to worry about from me. But officers who think they can use excessive force, who think they're above the law, who think they can treat citizens like enemies, those officers should be worried." The silence in the room was thick. These men and women had worked with Rodriguez, had known about his complaints, had done nothing to address his problems. Some of them were probably wondering if David was talking about them too. "I want to see Rodriguez's personnel file," David continued, "and the files of any other officers with multiple complaints. I want to review our training programs, our use of force policies, our community relations initiatives." Lieutenant Bradley shifted uncomfortably. "Chief, with respect, Rodriguez has always been backed by the union. His previous complaints were investigated and resolved." "Resolved how? By transferring him to different shifts? By giving him additional training that obviously didn't work? By ignoring the pattern until he shot an innocent woman during a traffic stop?" The room fell silent again. David could see he was making them uncomfortable, but that was necessary. Comfortable leadership was what had allowed Rodriguez to stay on the street despite his problems. "Here's what's going to happen," David said. "First, I'm implementing immediate changes to our use of force policy. Any officer who draws their weapon must complete an incident report within 2 hours. Any discharge of a firearm, intentional or accidental, triggers an automatic investigation." Captain Martinez looked skeptical. "That's going to create a lot of paperwork." "Good. Maybe it will make officers think twice before drawing their weapons unnecessarily," David continued. "Second, I'm establishing a civilian oversight board to review complaints against officers. Community members will have a voice in how their police department operates." Commander Foster frowned. "The union isn't going to like that. The union represents officers, not the community. Our job is to serve the community." "Third," David said, "I'm implementing mandatory bias training for all officers. Not the once-a-year video they can sleep through. Real training with real consequences for those who don't take it seriously." Lieutenant Bradley was shaking his head. "Chief, you're talking about changing everything. This department has operated successfully for decades." "Successfully?" David's voice got sharper. "Is shooting innocent citizens during traffic stops what you call success? Is pointing guns at fellow officers what you call success?" The lieutenant looked down at the table, unable to meet David's eyes. After the meeting, David walked back to his office, where Rebecca was reading on her tablet. She looked up as he entered. "How did it go?" "About as well as expected. They think I'm going to destroy the department." Rebecca set down her tablet. "Maybe you should destroy parts of it. The parts that allowed what happened to me to happen." David sat down behind his desk, the desk where he would make decisions that could change how policing worked in Riverside County. Through his window, he could see officers in the squad room below, some of them glancing up at his office with obvious resentment. His computer showed dozens of emails, some supportive, some threatening. many from officers throughout the department expressing their concerns about his leadership. David skimmed through them, noting which officers seemed open to change and which were already positioning themselves as obstacles. Around noon, Officer Torres knocked on his door. He looked nervous but determined. "Chief Williams, I wanted to let you know I've enrolled in additional training programs. De-escalation, cultural sensitivity, legal updates. I know I made mistakes on Friday and I want to make sure I never make them again." David studied the young officer. "Why are you telling me this, Torres?" "Because I want you to know that not everyone in this department is like Rodriguez. Some of us want to be better." After Torres left, David thought about the choice he faced. He could try to work within the existing system, make gradual changes, avoid rocking the boat too much. Or he could push for the dramatic reforms that were really needed, knowing it would create enemies and make his job much harder. Rebecca solved his dilemma without even knowing it. Looking out the window at the protesters still gathered outside, she said quietly, "You know what I keep thinking about? All the other women who've been in my position, but didn't have a husband who was about to become police chief. What happened to them? Did they get justice? Or did officers like Rodriguez just move on to their next victim?" David knew she was right. This wasn't about his comfort or his job security. It was about making sure what happened to Rebecca didn't happen to anyone else. He picked up his phone and called Captain Peterson. "I want to address the entire department. All shifts, everyone who's available. Set up the main briefing room." An hour later, David stood before nearly 200 officers. Some looked supportive, others openly hostile. Most just curious about what their new chief would say. Rebecca sat in the back row, her presence serving as a reminder of why they were all there. "I know most of you would rather I wasn't here," David began. "Some of you think I'm unqualified. Others think I'm biased. A few probably think I'm here to destroy everything you've worked for." The room was completely silent. "Let me tell you what I think," David continued. "I think most of you became police officers because you wanted to help people. You wanted to make your community safer. You wanted to make a difference." A few officers nodded slightly. "But somewhere along the way, some of us forgot that the people we serve aren't our enemies. They're our neighbors. They're taxpayers who pay our salaries. They're citizens who deserve to be treated with dignity and respect, even when they ask questions we don't like." David's voice got stronger. "On Friday afternoon, my wife asked to see an officer's badge number. That's not resisting arrest. That's not a threat. That's a citizen exercising her legal rights. And for that, she was shot." The room was so quiet David could hear the air conditioning. "I'm not here for revenge," David said. "I'm here to make sure that what happened to my family never happens to any other family in this county. If that threatens you, if that makes you uncomfortable, then maybe you need to ask yourself why." David looked around the room, making eye contact with as many officers as possible. "Starting today, things are going to change. We're going to remember that we work for the community, not the other way around. We're going to treat every citizen with respect, regardless of their race, their economic status, or how many questions they ask us." Some officers were nodding now. Others still looked skeptical, but at least they were listening. "I know change is hard," David concluded, "but the alternative is more incidents like Friday. More families torn apart. More communities that don't trust their police. More officers whose mistakes destroy their own lives and careers." David paused, then said the words that would define his leadership. "We're going to be better. Not just because I'm ordering it, but because it's the right thing to do." As the officers filed out of the briefing room, David could see the division in their ranks. Some came up to shake his hand, to express support for his vision. Others left without making eye contact, their body language making their feelings clear. Rebecca approached the podium as the room emptied. "That was a good speech. Think it will make a difference?" "With some of them, yes. With others, probably not. But you're not trying to save everyone, David. You're trying to save the department." That afternoon, David implemented his first official policy change: mandatory body cameras for all officers, with severe consequences for anyone who turned them off during interactions with citizens. The union immediately filed a grievance, but David was ready for the fight. Over the next few weeks, other changes followed. The Civilian Oversight Board, enhanced training requirements, stricter accountability measures. Each change met resistance from some officers and support from others, gradually dividing the department into those who embraced reform and those who fought it. Rodriguez was ultimately fired and faced criminal charges. Torres, after completing additional training and demonstrating real commitment to change, became one of David's most reliable officers. About 30 officers transferred to other departments rather than work under David's leadership, which he considered a positive development. 6 months later, citizen complaints against the department had dropped by 60%. Community trust, as measured by surveys and town halls, had improved dramatically. The department had implemented some of the most progressive police reforms in the state. Rebecca's shoulder healed completely, and she returned to her law practice with an even stronger commitment to civil rights work. She often spoke at police training sessions, sharing her story and helping officers understand the impact of their actions on the families they served. David Williams had walked into the Riverside County Police Department that gray Monday morning as a man, seeking to prove himself worthy of leadership. He walked out that first day as a chief determined to prove that law enforcement could change, could improve, could earn back the trust it had lost. The incident that had threatened to end his career before it started had instead become the foundation for one of the most successful police reform efforts in the country. And it all began with a simple truth, that even police chiefs' wives deserve to be treated with dignity and respect during a traffic stop. Sometimes change comes from the most unexpected places. Sometimes it takes a tragedy to create the opportunity for real reform, and sometimes the person best qualified to fix a broken system is someone who has experienced its failures firsthand. David Williams proved that the right leader, in the right place at the right time, could transform not just a police department, but an entire community's relationship with law enforcement. All it took was the courage to insist that everyone, regardless of who they were or who they were married to, deserved equal justice under the law.